My daughter said she'd come back in a week, just 1 week. She smiled when she said it, like it was nothing to worry about, like time would pass quickly and everything would stay exactly the same until she returned. And I believed her, not because I had proof, but because she was my daughter. You don't question promises like that when they come from someone you've trusted your whole life. So I waited, calm at first, certain, because a week isn't long unless it turns into something else. The first few days felt normal, quiet but expected. I kept myself occupied with small routines, things that made the time pass without thinking too much about it. I didn't check the clock constantly. I didn't count the days. Because when you trust someone, you don't measure time, you just let it move. And in those first days, I had no reason to think anything was wrong. By the end of the first week, I started noticing the silence. Not in a dramatic way, just in small moments. A missed call that never came. A message that wasn't sent. It wasn't enough to cause concern, but it was enough to be noticed. Still, I told myself it was nothing. People get busy, plans shift. A few extra days didn't mean anything had changed. The second week felt different, not heavier, just longer. Time slowed down in a way that made each day more noticeable. I started checking my phone more often, not out of panic, but out of habit, expecting something simple. A message saying she'd be late, a reason, something to hold on to. But the silence stayed the same. I thought about reaching out first, more than once. But every time I picked up the phone, I stopped, because part of me didn't want to ask, didn't want to turn a promise into a question. If someone says they'll come back, you shouldn't have to remind them. And that thought kept me from calling, even when the waiting started to feel longer than it should have. By the third week, the waiting changed. It wasn't about when she would come back anymore. It was about why she hadn't. And that question stayed in the background of everything I did. Not loud, not overwhelming, just present. Like something unfinished that you can't ignore, no matter how much you try to focus on something else. The house felt different too. Not physically, nothing had changed, but emotionally. Spaces that once felt normal started to feel quieter, more still. And when silence stays too long, it stops feeling peaceful. It starts feeling empty. And that emptiness doesn't come from being alone, it comes from expecting someone who isn't there. The fourth week was when I stopped making excuses for it. Not angrily, not emotionally, just clearly. Whatever the reason was, it wasn't temporary anymore. It wasn't a delay or a small change in plans. It had become something else, something I didn't fully understand yet but couldn't ignore either. I finally picked up the phone and called, not to confront, not to question, just to hear something, anything, but it went unanswered. No message, no return call, just silence exactly the same as before. And that silence said more than any explanation could have. 6 weeks passed, not one message, not one call, not one sign she was coming back. And just when I stopped waiting, someone knocked on my door. A stranger, standing there like they had something to say, something I wasn't expecting at all. I didn't open the door right away. Not out of fear, but out of confusion. I wasn't expecting anyone. After 6 weeks of silence, you stop expecting anything at all. So a knock, sudden and deliberate, felt out of place. I stood there for a moment, listening, making sure it was real. And when it came again, steady and certain, I finally moved. When I opened the door, the person standing there wasn't familiar. Mid-aged, calm, composed, someone who didn't look lost or unsure. They weren't there by accident. You can tell when someone knows exactly why they've come, and this person did. Their eyes met mine like they already recognized me, even though I had never seen them before. They didn't start with a question. They said my name, clearly, confidently, and that alone shifted everything. Because it meant this wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. They had come here for me specifically. And suddenly, that quiet house didn't feel as still as it had moments before. I asked who they were, keeping my tone steady, not defensive, just direct, and they answered without hesitation. They introduced themselves simply, but what mattered wasn't their name, it was what they said next. They told me they had been trying to reach someone connected to me and hadn't been able to. My first thought was obvious: my daughter. The connection formed instantly, even before they said anything else. 6 weeks of silence doesn't leave many possibilities. And the way they paused before continuing told me this wasn't going to be simple information. They asked if we could talk inside. Not urgently, not aggressively, just calmly. and something about their tone made it clear this wasn't a conversation for the doorway. So I stepped aside and let them in. Not because I trusted them yet, but because I needed to understand why they were there. Once inside, they didn't waste time. They explained that they had been trying to locate my daughter for weeks, calls unanswered, messages ignored, attempts to reach her through other contacts unsuccessful, and then they said something that made everything shift in a way I hadn't expected. They told me my daughter had used my name, not casually, not by mistake, formally, legally, and whatever she had used it for had now led back to me. For a moment, I didn't respond, not because I didn't understand, but because I was trying to place it, trying to connect something I knew with something I didn't. My name isn't something that just gets used without reason, and the fact that a complete stranger was now standing in my home because of it meant this wasn't small. And then they said the one thing that changed everything: this involves a property. A house, bought recently, under my name, signed by my daughter. For a moment, the words didn't fully register. A property under my name? It sounded distant, like something that didn't belong to my life. But the more I replayed it, the clearer it became. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mix-up. This was something real, and somehow I was already involved in it. I asked them to explain everything from the beginning. Not quickly, not vaguely, clearly. And they did, step by step. A property had been purchased weeks ago, documents signed, identity verified, everything processed as if it had been done by me, and every part of it led back to one name, mine. The timeline hit me first. Weeks ago, exactly when my daughter said she'd be back in 1 week. The overlap wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. And suddenly, those 6 weeks of silence didn't feel empty anymore. They felt intentional, like something had been happening the entire time, just not where I could see it. I asked the question I already knew the answer to: who signed it? And even before they responded, I could feel it. That quiet certainty forming, the kind that doesn't need confirmation. But they gave it anyway. The signature matched mine, but the person who completed the process was my daughter. That was the moment everything shifted emotionally. Not loudly, not dramatically, just deeply. Because this wasn't about a delay anymore. It wasn't about her being busy or unavailable. This was a choice, a deliberate decision that involved using my name without telling me, without asking me, without even being present afterward. I didn't react immediately. No anger, no raised voice, just stillness. Because sometimes when something is that clear, you don't need a reaction, you need understanding. And what I was starting to understand wasn't simple. It wasn't one mistake. It was a series of decisions that all led to the same place. They continued explaining. Payments had started. Documents had been approved. Everything looked legitimate from the outside. But when follow-ups were required, when confirmations were needed, that's when things stopped. Calls unanswered, emails ignored, and eventually everything circled back to me. I thought about those weeks again, the silence, the waiting, the decision not to call her first. And now, looking at it clearly, I realized something. While I was waiting for her to come back, she had already moved forward without me, completely. The realization didn't feel sharp, it felt heavy, because it wasn't just about what she did. It was about what she didn't consider, the position it would put me in, the responsibility it would bring back to me without warning, and most of all, the fact that she chose not to tell me at all. And then I asked the only question that mattered now: where is she? There was a pause, a brief one, before they answered, and when they did, it wasn't what I expected. We don't know exactly, but we have a location. A different city, a new address, a place she never mentioned, a different city, a new address, words that should have felt distant, but didn't. Instead, they landed heavily, like something final. She hadn't just been gone. She had relocated, started something new, built something separate. And she had done it without saying a word to me. That realization didn't come with anger at first. It came with clarity. I asked for the address, not urgently, not emotionally, just directly. If there were answers, they weren't going to come from waiting anymore. 6 weeks had already proven that, and whatever this situation had become, it wasn't something I could ignore or hope would resolve on its own. The decision to go wasn't dramatic. No long thoughts, no hesitation, just a quiet understanding that this needed to be faced directly. Not through calls, not through messages, but in person, because some things can't be explained from a distance, especially not something like this. The journey felt longer than it should have, not because of the distance, but because of the weight of what I was walking into. Every possibility crossed my mind, not exaggerated, just realistic. What I would say, what she would say, and whether there was even an explanation that could make sense of all this. When I finally stood in front of the address, everything became still again. A different house, a different place. Nothing about it felt familiar except the reason I was there. For a moment, I just stood there taking it in, because once I knocked, there was no going back to not knowing. I knocked once, then waited not long because footsteps came quickly from inside, and then the door opened. She stood there, not surprised, not shocked, just still, and that, more than anything, changed the moment. Because it meant she knew this could happen, maybe not when, but that it would. And now, standing face to face after 6 weeks of silence, there was no distance left to hide behind. For a second, neither of us spoke. No immediate reaction, no explanation rushing out, just silence, but a different kind this time, not empty, not distant. This silence was full of everything that hadn't been said yet. I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse. I just said one thing: you used my name. Simple, clear, enough to remove any space for misunderstanding. She didn't deny it. And that was the moment everything shifted, because denial would have been easier to handle. But honesty, quiet, direct honesty, meant this was intentional from the beginning. She stepped aside and let me in without saying a word. No resistance, no attempt to avoid the conversation. And that alone said a lot, because it meant she wasn't planning to deny anything. Whatever this was, she was ready to face it, or at least she knew she had to. Inside, everything felt unfamiliar, not just the place, but the situation itself. A new space, a new setup, something she had clearly been building, and as I looked around, the reality became more defined. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't something she had just started. It had been planned, carefully. I didn't sit down right away. I stayed standing, keeping things direct, and I asked the question that had been forming since the moment I heard about the property. Why? Not angrily, not emotionally, just clearly. Because before anything else, I needed to understand what could lead to a decision like this. She took a moment before answering, not avoiding, thinking, and then she explained. She said she didn't think I would agree if she asked, that I would question it, slow it down, maybe stop it completely. So she made the decision on her own, used my name to move faster, to secure something she believed was necessary. The explanation didn't come with excuses, it came with reasoning. But reasoning doesn't remove responsibility, and that was clear in the way she spoke. She knew what she had done, not just the action, but the impact, and that awareness was there, even if it came after everything had already been set in motion. I listened without interrupting, not because I agreed, but because I wanted to hear all of it without breaking the moment. And when she finished, the situation felt fully visible, not justified, not resolved, just clear. Every part of it laid out without anything hidden. I told her something simple, that using my name wasn't just a shortcut. It was a responsibility she had placed on me without my consent. That whatever she built, whatever she planned, it now had consequences that came back to me. And those consequences weren't something I had chosen. She didn't argue with that. She didn't try to shift the responsibility away. Instead, she acknowledged it, fully. And then she said something that changed the direction of everything. She said she was ready to fix it. Not later, not eventually. Now, that didn't erase what happened. It didn't undo the 6 weeks, the silence, or the decision she made. But it shifted the outcome. Because accountability changes what comes next. And for the first time in this entire situation, it felt like things were moving toward resolution, not avoidance. She left me waiting for 6 weeks, built something without me, used my name without asking, and in the end, it wasn't the truth that changed everything. It was the moment she finally chose to take responsibility for it. Because silence can break trust, but accountability is the only thing that can rebuild it.